Meeting to order. It's 7:02. And we could start with a round of attendance. Ginny.
Ginny's here.
Paul Grady is here.
Mark St. Ange is here.
Eric Eisenhower, present.
Marianne Weatherall, present.
Tom Reardon, present. Is that, and Jen, just for the roll? Would you like to announce your presence?
Oh, yes, Jennifer Dial, present.
Great. Thank you. All right, the issue before us tonight is the question of whether or not we should reconsider the vote of September 27th to fund 4 units of affordable housing at 1 Pleasant Street. After that vote, in the period since then, there has been what I would describe as sort of a growing level of interest in that vote, and it's both wisdom and efficacy. And the basic argument goes that under the restrictions that existed on that property, that 4 units would be affordable regardless of what CPC did, and that our action was simply redundant on the overall impact of housing units available for affordable housing in Cohasset. So then 3 of us, Ginny and Mary Jane and Marianne and I spoke with, Jennifer. And I spoke with Stuart Sager, who is the executive director of the Community Preservation Coalition. That's a group of 195 communities who have subscribed to the Community Preservation Act and made up of an assorted group of nonprofits interested in the various areas that overlap the functions of CPC. And he, in that discussion, echoed the concerns that have been expressed by the various housing groups within the town about both wisdom and efficacy of that vote, and went on to say that one of the important issues, and something that is defined by state law, is that value has to be determined by an independent assessment, an appraisal made on the property, and no such appraisal has been made. So under state law, we would have to go back and revisit that anyway to establish what we're actually buying in terms of unit and square footage space. So that is where we stand coming into this. I have then, after the hearing last week before the Board of Selectmen, I invited those who are interested from the housing community come and join us so that this committee could have the opportunity to hear their views, their concerns, and then after that, we could ask the question, do we want to reconsider the vote? And if so, what do we want? How do we want to move from there? So that's where we are now. Let me begin by asking whether the committee members have any questions. No questions. Great. All right. Yes.
I do have a question. I didn't quite understand. There's some subtlety in the language here.
Okay.
4 units were voted for to be affordable housing,
Yes.
and they joined all the other. Is it said in the bylaw or something that all of these are going to be affordable housing come what may? Is that how I understand it?
My understanding, and we have a variety of people who may want to respond to this, but my understanding is that under the permits that were granted by the planning board, that there are restrictions for 4 units to be affordable. The town has said that they would make all units affordable, but on different standards, not necessarily on the strict 40B standards. But the only things that would be absolutely assured were the 4 that are required by the zoning restriction, by the planning board restrictions. So we voted to support those 4 units, thereby some would argue just duplicating what had already been specified by regulation. So the question is that right? Do people accept that or not? Do they have questions? And to give an opportunity to have a free and open exchange on.
And Tom, are you referring to the memo from the Cohasset Planning Board dated July 28, 2021 that stated on page 2 about the proposed residential units and how there were going to be rentals, and this is what was presented to the town for the application? And that's where
I believe so, yes. I don't have that in front of me, but that sounds right.
Okay.
That was.
I was reading through this today and
Yep.
it did say that the applicant required that there be two affordable units. And the applicant proposes to develop this project as a local initiative project with 25% of then it says 4 units constructed as affordable units. So it was already stated that they were planning to make the units affordable.
And according to the vote that was taken, there is a restriction that required those 4 units to be affordable.
Okay.
Therefore, our vote did not add to the affordable number. It was simply duplicated what had already been required by the planning board.
I understand. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Ginny?
I thought Susan had an interesting idea at one of the last meeting about nailing down all of the units in perpetuity. Would you like to talk to us?
Why don't we begin with sort of a more systematic comment there, so to let each of the groups who are here speak, and then have questions of them, and then consider whether we want to do anything about all this or not. And so, all right, but we will certainly get to that point. All right, any other questions? All right, let's begin. I don't know how the planning groups would prefer to begin, but maybe since we have Steve on Zoom, maybe start there so that if he needs to go someplace, he told me he was going to be in transit, so, and then we'll stay with in-house. So Steve, you have the floor.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. To be responsive to the original question, under the permitting process, excuse me, the original development plans for 14 residential units would then require under our town bylaws that 25% of those units be deeded as affordable housing. That comes out to 3.5 units on 14. So the contractor is permitted for 4 deeded affordable units. The remainder, however, the other 10 units count towards our subsidized housing inventory, or said differently, those 4 units count for our requirements in the town as if they were 14. Okay, so that's why that's particularly important. Under the proposal, we don't get 14, we get 13. All right, we still have the 4 deeded affordable units, but no longer will we get 14, we actually lose a unit.
But it's
Okay.
not also required that they be affordable, right? I mean, they
is-
will count under the state mandate, but they do not necessarily have to be at the 40B levels.
No. As a private developer, the private developer has the ability to rent those at market rates. And I believe the proposal that the town body has put forward proposes that the remainder 9 units be in some way, shape, or form affordable, ideally as workforce housing. And as many are finding out, and I think Paul Kearse is in the audience and can speak much more fully to this. The idea is a good one. However, the execution is fairly precise, and it doesn't necessarily allow for directing those workforce units to the local workforce, right? That's the ideal. That's what we all would like to do, but state law doesn't necessarily allow that. I think you accurately summed up the concerns that I initially expressed to you directly, that at the time that the committee was considering this proposal, I don't believe anybody from either Affordable Housing Steering Committee, Housing Authority was even alerted to the proposal. From the trust's standpoint, our concern is, as you've noted, that this building would not be occupied without 4 deeded affordable units. And the resulting remaining units would also count against the SHI inventory as a result of that. So any funding that CPC does for this effectively is cash at closing. That's really what it is. It's not buying additional units. And the entire purpose of the trust and the steering committee, it has as its goal to build new additional units in town or to convert them where possible. Because even though we are currently in compliance with the 2020 census, it is doubtful that we'll be close to compliance in our current inventory with the 2030 census. So we need to build units. Having said that, our goal in doing so is to stay within the community character so that we control our destiny rather than being subject to what's called an unfriendly 40B. And I believe all of you were residents at the time when the last time we encountered an unfriendly 40B, and that was the Avalon development. Look, Avalon, there's nothing wrong with Avalon, but we didn't have very much say over traffic mitigation or our concerns with respect to the impact it might have on public safety. Such a densely populated housing would in fact the septic system be able to handle it. You know, unfriendly 40B allows for fast tracking within the planning process. So our goal is to be able to develop affordable housing, support it, maintain it, or convert it in a way that actually is beneficial to the community as a whole. Reason that that's important is, frankly, CPC has been the primary benefactor of the trust. And funding for this particular project, if it were going to be built otherwise, in our view, hits the very source of funds that we might want to approach you with for future projects to build additional units. And, you know, really, more often than not, the question that we get as a trust from any private developer that's looking to examine a project is your trust funded? Now, look, in a different town somewhere else in the state of Massachusetts, the funding, the free funding that we have at the moment, free meaning that it is not committed, is approaching $1 million. In the town of Cohasset, that buys 2 building lots, maybe. So from our perspective, we're concerned that number one, that the town might vote on a warrant article that the CPC proposes to put $1.3 million into a project that would not be occupied without those units anyway. And frankly, it reduces 1 unit from its original permitting. And secondly, we are concerned that any project that we bring forward in the near future, we hope the near future, is probably going to run into a tighter funding environment. Because frankly, we're looking at what CPC pulls in, what CPC is committing to its variety of different requests, and recognize that the housing trust is just one of those. And frankly, there's not that much to go around sometimes. So let me summarize with that, and I'll answer any questions if you have any. As I said, my colleague from the steering committee, Paul Kears, is well versed on many of these things and can actually offer more detail than we often can.
Steve, let me ask you, if the committee decided that it would vote to cover additional units within One Pleasant Street, would that be viewed by the foundation, by the fund as trust, as a positive?
It's in what respect? With the additional deed restrictions?
Yes, precisely. So that you have 4 that are now required affordable, you have 9 that are not. If the CPC money were used to extend the number of restricted units, would that not achieve some of the purpose that?
I think it's worth spreading this question also to Mr. Kears, but I believe at the moment it would actually achieve nothing further from the inventory standpoint, but as a practical matter, it could create more truly affordable units. Having said that, if they were deed restricted as affordable, they would not be very effective as workforce housing.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions?
Does the Affordable Housing Trust have anything in the pipeline as we speak? Because I know that we're leaving back $800,000 right now, moving up, and I think Mr. Senior could address as to what CPC expects to receive over the next year or so. And my just thoughts in are community preservation.
You mean outside of the 2 new units at 808 Jerusalem?
Outside, do we have anything in the pipeline right now?
We
at this
have
point.
a project on South Main that we've committed to. We're examining a couple of other proposals, but I leave it at proposals because they've gone no further.
Okay, so just like, that's where my thought lies, Steve, is that we're looking at community preservation, which belongs to all of Cohasset. And, you know, and I laud all the work your committee does. So please don't get me wrong. But what we're looking at doing is the remainder of the units can go market. They might add to the pool. But what we're committed to doing is workforce, perhaps elderly, veterans, and a lottery system that really speaks to what community preservation is. That's where, you know, where I differ on this.
We understand there's going to be a difference of opinion on this. Actually administering the housing as workforce housing is a lot more difficult than it sounds. As I pointed out to you, Mr. Chairman, when we talked individually, between the steering committee and the trust, we have the better part of 60 years now of experience working with the law, the state law. When asked about this by the town manager, I said, yeah, you know, we might be interested in administering it. That is to say, the trust might be interested in administering the units, but we won't do anything without a deed. And I'm not talking about a deed restriction. I'm talking about a deed. You need to segregate those units from a public facility. And frankly, the administration of it, the direction of it, including who goes in, who goes out, financial analysis, we're not, frankly, I'm embarrassed to talk about it because I can say without question that the most complete review I've had of the entire proposal was a 10 to 15 minute slideshow the other night at the selectmen's meeting. We truly don't have a feel for the financial impact, what the analysis is for cap rates, none of that. And so frankly, I can't offer an educated opinion on the existing proposal. I can only offer an educated opinion on what I think the impacts are going to be.
Any other questions for Mr. Garmer? All right, well, thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate
You're
it.
quite welcome. Thank you.
Next, Paul, do you want to follow up?
Sure. Paul Kears, 39 Coach Road. I am the chairman of the Affordable Housing Steering Committee, which we work in concert with the Housing Trust in order to help foster and grow affordable housing in the town. And there's 2 types of affordable housing. There's what they call the Big A affordable housing, which is property that are deeded and restricted to a specific income level. It's usually for 30 years or more. Is that deed restriction? Then there's the small A, which is some people kind of confuse it with workforce housing because the same applicant is in that pool. But we needed more affordable housing in the town so folks could afford to live here that perhaps work here, or folks that are downsizing and want to stay in Cohasset. Right now, if you downsize, you pretty much have to move out of Cohasset to a certain extent. So our group has always been focused on that. In fact, we have seats on our board that are represented by planning and also by elder affairs, so that we're making sure that we're capturing all aspects of what we're doing. So far, we're all on the same page as far as that goes. When this particular project came up, this has been in front of us for probably a year and a half. When the contractor came, was putting in the units, it came to planning. So Town bylaws require that 4 units be deeded affordable. So no matter who buys the building, the 4 units are already deeded. And the way the state works is that because those 4 units are deeded, and it has contiguous apartments in it, we get credit for all 14. So the town gets credit for 14 affordable units, even though 4 of them will be physically affordable when you write the check every month to someone who's designated to live in those.
So irrespective of what the selling price or rental is of the other units, still considered affordable. A strange law that is. Excuse my comment. That seems a rather bizarre law, doesn't it?
It is, the state law, and everyone's required to conform to that. So, for those who are here from housing on Elm Street, they can tell you over the last number of years, the state has changed how they control that, and it hasn't been intuitive, to say the least. I can tell you that in the experience that our group has had so far, the Harbor Project, they opted, as part of our bylaws, is they opted not to have affordable housing units on site. They chose to find housing units that they could convert somewhere else in town. So there was property that had 4 units, and they entered in an agreement with the property owner to deed restrict the entire property to affordable housing. So they got credit for the 4 units that we got credit for in our housing stock. They had to go through that same state portal, and they had a tough time for 6 months trying to get people qualified to move into those units. CJC, which is the Stop and Shop Plaza, they have about 20 units up there, in which I think 4 of those or 5 of those are affordable. They too had to go through the portal. They had to find people to get in there.
5 units.
5 units. And the rest of them we get credit for because they're rentals. If the properties were condominiums, such as here in the harbor, those are condominiums. Condominiums, you don't get credit for the rest of the units in the building. You only get credit for the 4 that are there. So a good example of that is in the village, there was a proposal in front of us, and also the planning board, to put up a building where the gas station is. So we said, geez, if you made them apartments, we'd get credit for all 12 towards the housing stock. But if you made them condo, we only got credit for 2. So that's kind of how that works with the state and how they calculate affordable housing. So that's how it works. So what we're trying to do is get the most number of countable units. And like every industry, everyone has to make money at doing it. The only way that affordable housing works is, through grants and subsidies and tax credits that are pretty pronounced in the industry when putting in units. Avalon's a good example. They get a lot of tax credits. 20% of those are affordable. So we get a lot of credit for all those units up there. We get credit for all 220 units that are up there. So that's how it works. So moving forward from how that works to where we are as a group, I know that you had mentioned $800,000, $1,600,000 a year goes into CPC. It's not all for housing. I believe we get the smallest amount percentage-wise for housing. Is it divided by a third, and a third?
Well, they're actually 4.
4, okay. So
10% each, actually. Are you entitled to 10% of your total take, I think?
So housing gets how much?
Well, it depends what we apply for.
Okay.
Apply for.
So in general,
But there is a large unrestricted account from
Right,
which
that's
they
the
can
fourth.
draw. For example, on this, we were looking at a substantial amount of money coming from the unrestricted into the housing for this purpose. So, and that happens on other issues as well.
so once those funds come in, then you decide what buckets and how to portion those based on projects that are coming.
Well, the law requires certain stipulations for each bucket has to have so much in it. but then often that's augmented by the unrestricted part in order to meet the funding for a particular project.
Let's moving forward, one of the projects, Steve, did not mention was 808 Jerusalem Road, which is a Habitat for Humanity. So they had gone to the trust and bid on the land. And then the trust had also allocated them or approved $75,000 for them as well. They need to fundraise, I believe, anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000 as well, and they're used to going to CPCs in the various towns in Massachusetts to do that. And they have not come in front of you for any funding yet at all, and they plan to and they would like to. So that is one project that is hitting. Those are two. It's a home with 2 units, and those both are deeded in perpetuity for affordable housing.
Is this for the land that you're buying, or is it for the housing as well?
It's for the housing as well. So there's a lot.
No, I just wanted to maybe address your concern if I could, Paul. I'd ask Mr. Senior. Chris, what is our projected intake to CPC over the next, say, 2 years?
How many years?
50?
So let's say,
1 year, 10 years ago.
say 1 year. What are we projecting to take into CPC? Let's say 1, 2.
I don't have it from the fall I gave this 80 rising 7 years.
All right, with the 8 that we currently have, less what we're proposing on Pleasant.
We did get an email, CPC member saying, from the CPA saying that, because statewide housing is down, we may not get as much money from them. Something to consider. Statewide housing sales are down.
Not in Cohasset.
No, but I mean, that's this pot, but the pot that we get from the EPA.
And remember, the single largest amount is the money surcharge notice on Cohasset's. And that's already at $600,000. All of a sudden, much less than we actually, that's not even 10% match. And the smallest match in the last 20 years is 18%.
Okay, so it matches off of ours. Well,
But it's really not done that way. They give you a amount of money, but you consider it, maybe instead of $100,000, you might have anything what you would generate. We don't really give a match in that sense, by percentage. Not though, again, because the tax base has risen so much, value is going up, the amount of money that the fund generates every year continues to rise regardless.
Chris, I missed your figure. It was 680, I think?
Yeah, I saw that chart.
I have,
okay.
I have the chart. Over the next 10 years, it ranges, and this is kind of defined, at least by Chris, as being very conservative because it projects a 10% reimbursement and a 2.5% new growth. So given that, we would move from a base of 648,000 in 2025 to 809,730 in 34.
Excluding state match?
No, including the state match at 10%.
Okay.
Which it could be higher or lower, but historically, it's been higher,
It
so.
doesn't include, Eric, like the new values that would come on, like.
Exactly, it shows the base going up at 2.5%, not greater.
Yeah, the 2.5 says the annual.
Did you say it was 680?
680
680.
was the total.
So what I was getting at while they're looking at that,
Is we're not running out of money.
board has taken that
Even
into
if it's
account.
$600,000 a year, you're saying best case, you put $200,000 aside for affordable housing, $180,000 aside for affordable housing.
We put 10%,
so that's 40% of the total.
Yeah, okay.
and then it depends on the applicants.
So when we saw the article for this particular property, we were kind of surprised by the number of 1.3 million. And what would be a better use of funds for that other than a town hall? Is the perception that we had, because we weren't involved in any of the discussions prior to that. Select board moving as quickly as they need to do because the property is market. So it's something that they had to put on executive session, which includes a lot of folks from like us, privy to information and decision-making process. So we're coming to this saying, geez, how did they get to the 1.3 million and how does this make sense? From the housing perspective, we disagree with two things. One is I'd rather the money stay there for future housing specific needs, whether it be like 808 Jerusalem, or if we want to put in 40R, which is workforce housing. There's properties that we can put workforce housing in now. We felt that even though they want to purchase this 1 Pleasant Street, this 41 Highland needs CPC money in order to preserve the old town hall and then do something more specific with the annex that's attached to it. So we felt that the best use of CPC money would be really absorbed over there more appropriately than 1 Pleasant Street. Now, 1 Pleasant Street, we take issue with only because the property is already deeded with 4 units. And according to the Article 6 that is in the warrant, it says that you will be buying affordable housing, and that's not an accurate statement. You're not buying anything. The town is entering an agreement to purchase a building for the purpose of using it as a town hall and as rental income to help offset expenses over time, which is something that they've talked about several times around town. So it's not in the spirit of the use of funds for CPC to be using the money as a down payment or towards the purchasing of a town hall. And it specifically says that CPC money will defray the cost and associated tax increases of the acquisition, which is totally against the use of funds definition for CPC. So you can't use CPC money to divert taxes for buying a town hall. That doesn't make sense to us. And the deed restriction is already there, so you're not buying affordable housing. What would make sense from CPC's perspective is that if the town purchases the building and becomes a town hall, what would be appropriate is now that there is affordable housing units and the rental property that you get credit for as affordable housing unit, it would be appropriate to allocate funds to front the town the funds to get that all set up for the management fee, registering with the state, qualifying tenants, getting the tenants in, helping manage that property for the first, 18 to 24 months until they generate the revenue from rental income that will offset those expenses. So right now, I think they estimated like $380,000 a year of rental income coming off of those fully full apartments, all 13 full. That funding will show up. And though they all have ideas on what to do with that $380,000, it has not been legislated to be put in specific buckets yet as to where that money would go. Obviously, they want to use it for affordable housing. They want to use it for maintenance. They want to use it for a lot of good intentioned things, but it has not been to where that is exactly going to happen. Now, I know it did mention maintenance in here as well in the articles, but according to your bylaws, you're not allowed to use CPC funding for maintenance. So that is in the chapter for that. Though I know you do give money to Elm Street. So, I don't know.
No, we're not allowed to have maintenance.
Right. What you can do on the maintenance side of it, there is a mechanism in your charter that says that you can give money to the housing trust. The housing trust give that money out for repairs and maintenance for affordable housing. That would be the mechanism.
Paul?
2 points I disagree, and Gene, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I do think that CPC is allocated.
Could you speak up, Paul, please?
I think that CPC is allocated funds for painting and
Well-
general upgrade. No, I just want, then I'll finish my statement, because I'm actually leaning towards Paul. So I disagree that you're saying CPC, we're not operating in the spirit of CPC. Right, I have to disagree with that. I think we're going over and above to operate within the spirit of CPC. I emphasize community preservation. Now, if someone else gets their hands in this building, they may have the 4 units. We may get the points on board for having the 14 affordable units. But anybody's gonna probably go market with it. All right, so that to me is not in the spirit. So if you go and market and you're just counting it off on the inventory, who's that helping besides the building owner? And where we're looking at is elderly, veterans, workforce, whatever's gonna be the best fit. I think that more than operates within the spirit of CPC. I just go back in my head and to community preservation. We're trying to preserve what's left of Cohasset. Because as we all know, a lot of the towns, we're priced out of the market. We don't have people coming in that can afford to live here, our teachers, some are elderly who want to downsize perhaps, veterans, or anything along those lines. And that's, to me, is within the spirit, is the preservation of what we have, what we had, and what we should continue to have.
So
Instead
just
of
make one
shipping
correction
people
there.
in all
I'm talking about, in the spirit of
Mhm.
CPC, definition of the use of funds. I'm not talking about in the spirit of affordable housing. I'm specifically talking about the use of funds. The use of funds are specified in your chapter, and I'm just talking about this aspect of it. I know everybody here wants affordable housing, which I don't disagree with. And like I said, in the spirit of the use of funds, using it for specifically upfronting the town for getting those properties to get the tenants in and then paying those fees for that makes sense in the spirit of the use of funds. Now, in going into the 9 units that are currently at market rate, those need to be deeded as well. They need to be deeded as affordable, or they need to be deeded as workforce housing. That's the only way that, it's not the only way, it's the primary way that most municipalities are allowed to rent without discrimination to those groups of people that they want to rent to. Now, a CPC, it would be appropriate in their use of funds to fund what it would take to take those 9 units and deed restrict those specific to workforce housing, if that's what you want to do. Or seniors, right?
Veterans.
So that would have to be a deed restriction.
And that would meet the requirement
CPC
that,
funding could be used for that.
and that CPC funding would be then expanding the amount of affordable stock.
Right, it doesn't expand so there's already 13 units that you get credit for.
No, that's legal. I'm talking about actually bringing in affordable housing to people who live in it.
Right, small a.
Yes.
If you deed them to what Mr. Grady is saying, you would have to deed it in order for the town to rent it to those classes of people.
Either small A or big A, right? I mean, because you'd be doing workforce housing which would still deed it so that you couldn't go market. And so it would be expanding the affordable housing stock.
Right, so the town has 2 options, right? If you want small A affordable housing, if you really don't want a $3,000 apartment, or you want a $1,500 apartment, the question is, how does the town do that without discriminating against applicants, right? The way that municipalities do it is they deed restrict the property to certain classes of people in order to achieve the goal.
Can be done at income level,
It's done at income level.
so it's 120%.
Yep.
What, Susan?
What the figure that was used in the select board meeting when the presentation was made was that large A affordable housing is 80% of average income for the community.
It's like $86,000 in Cohasset.
80% of the average income. You can create and deed it such that the other 9 units would be maximum 120% of that, which is what workforce housing tends to be. But you don't have to necessarily limit it to workforce. It can be workforce at senior, or I guess veterans, as long as you've got the cap as to what the income level is. So you don't want somebody who's selling their $5 million house on Jerusalem Road for, to move in here just because they're senior. you know, and the same thing for workforce, you don't need to have someone who's earning, you know, a couple $100,000 or whatever. So what I'm saying is that if you put a cap on it with the income level,
Okay.
that can be into the deed. And since I have the floor, if you don't mind, I'm sorry I didn't identify myself, Susan Sardina, 100 Pond Street. As for the last select board meeting, that was my suggestion, that you all, as select board members, put something in writing that stipulates that in perpetuity, Paul's favorite words, in perpetuity, that those 9 units would be deeded in writing in perpetuity at whatever this income level is and for whatever the category is that you might indicate. That being the case, then CPC can consider what its vote is. If that is not in writing, you don't have any guarantee. Just, that's what you want to do, but.
You know, this is
Susan, I'm gonna say
a
this,
lot of good intentions. I mean, everybody wants the same thing, but, you know, state law requires deed restriction.
And CPC could, in its infinite wisdom, choose to require that.
Correct, right.
So-
You have contingencies placed upon your vote, for sure.
Yep.
You can approve it contingent on that deed restriction.
Exactly.
So the question
All you
is,
have to do is get the deed restriction done in writing.
to go back to your original point earlier about the valuation of the building.
Oh, yeah.
That has to be done by a third party, which is required by law, but it also stipulates that the town cannot pay more than 25% above the valuation. So that's another restriction.
Gene?
What does that mean?
If I come and sit up here?
No, please.
I'm going to sit up here because I've gotten a lot of feedback that if you talk from the audience, one online
Sorry.
can't hear. So Jean Healy Diffold, Select Board. So I wanted to just provide some factual background about what some of the considerations are that you have before you. Mr. Gomer's right. In many ways, this is a policy choice that you're making right now, including with respect to future uses, not just for affordable.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Sure. Between a rock and a hard place, which is a familiar place. So Mr. Gomer's right that there's future uses. There's an opportunity cost, right, to this money, but not just for affordable housing, for other sources as well that will come before you inevitably in the future. And Mr. Kearse is also right with respect to, they're both right that this property is already subject to a permit requirement by the planning board. I think the question that you're zoning in on, which is the correct one, is, but is there really going to be real affordable housing in the remaining 9, right? And so that's really a part of what the select board has been quickly trying to move through and figure out how best to effectuate that. And so I want to talk about that because I do think it's very relevant to your decision right now. So what we know, and Ms. Sardinia is right, in terms of workforce housing is typically 1/20 of area median income. Here in Cohasset, I went through and looked at the last town report as to what our emergency personnel made, our police and fire, who tend to actually make a lot because they do a lot of overtime. They work very hard. And if you look at their salaries, they are a little bit above 100% area median income because of that. And when you talk to those who are in the affordable housing world, particularly in the nonprofit CDC world, and I've spoken with some with our assistant town manager, that was one of the flags that they raised, that you'd be surprised with workforce housing, particularly for municipal employees, that you have to be mindful of that, because if you set the limits too low, then you are going to potentially exclude a lot of people, right? So one of the places that we find ourselves in is that we're trying to provide workforce housing that realistically can actually be workforce housing, particularly for some of our public safety personnel that we have been having trouble recruiting people to be firefighters in our town. We have some firefighters right now who live on the Cape. And so a part of this too is looking forward to the future as we continue to need public safety personnel. You see a lot of towns on the Cape actually doing what we're trying to do right now in Provincetown and Nantucket, and our lawyers represent those towns. And so we've gone to them and said, here's the situation, this is what we're trying to work through. And you do see that there are towns out there that are directly running affordable housing rentals, just in the way that we're proposing right now. And so the tricky part with CPC funding, which is why when we had this discussion, I want to say 4 or 6 weeks ago, is that the statute limits CPC funding for rental units that are maximum 100% area median income. And so that was a part of the select board's concern in associating the CPC funding with those remaining 9, because we wanted the flexibility to go up to 120 to actually make this real workforce housing and real little a for people who are downsizing out of Cohasset, or we want to do workforce housing, but we're worried about pricing them out because they're in this gap, right? If you want to do 40B housing and get the credit, so to speak, for that, you can only do max 80%, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 80% AMI. So we have people that are in this gap of 80 to 120. And CPC can legally only restrict funding or fund units that are between 80 and 100. And so what we have been doing with our lawyers over the weekend and following our last select board meeting is trying to draft a draft CPC grant agreement that would try to give comfort to the concept of the select board is committed and we're putting it in writing as a town, but also allow us the flexibility on up to 120 with with the remaining units. And so, you know, candidly, right now, we're looking at a draft agreement and we're saying, okay, if we do the CPC funding associated with the 4 units, but then we do these additional restrictions that aren't necessarily tied to the CPC funding, but the town is willing to provide those additional restrictions that will limit the rental incomes at 120. You know, can we do this? Can we do something to give you comfort at the same time reaching the end result that we're trying to effectuate here, which is, again, this little a affordable housing concept that our Affordable Housing Trust has not built yet and is probably going to struggle potentially to build because they're aiming for the 40B, right? And that's 80, but not more. And so we're trying to fill this gap, and it's a unique opportunity. And you know, candidly, when we saw the property, we were really trying to address the town hall solution, or problem, I should say. And so we are working quickly through it, and we're trying to work with our lawyers and our colleagues as well, listening to what they're proposing. So I'm not going to say everything is perfect because we are moving so quickly on a number of projects, but do think that one of the things that we will all likely face at town meeting, and this is a part of the consideration, is CPC represents taxes that people pay. If we have a large source of taxes sitting in a bucket that is arguably eligible for these projects that we can be using to productively meet the goals of CPC in a compliant way, I do think that there's going to be questions about why we aren't making good faith effort to do that. And so that's a part of our consideration.
Why we are what?
Why we're not making a good faith effort to try to work with CPC to do substantial funding for some of these projects, because none of the other tax increases and proposals that we're looking at have any CPC aspect to them whatsoever. So that's the tricky question that's really before all of us right now in terms of how to navigate all of these areas. And like I said, we're working on a grant agreement right now with our lawyers that I think we still need to work on a little bit. And the select board has a meeting for Thursday where we're going to look at that agreement. And once it's ready, send it to you. as well, but we also wanted to hear your feedback from this meeting that may inform, some edits that we do. So I wanted to give you that update because we are trying to, take into consideration feedback we've been hearing, including trying to figure out how to give people the comfort through an agreement, but also ensure that we give ourselves the flexibility to do that little A affordable housing at the same time.
I know Steve Gomer had a question.
Anybody on the board have a question?
Oh, no, I don't.
I have, well, first of all, regarding taxpayer money, the taxpayers decided that they didn't want CPC to distribute these funds according to CPA. So take that off of them. I mean, taxpayers have decided that they want the CPC to distribute funds in the way that they feel, not necessarily to fund town projects, okay? And the second thing that concerns me is when you go up to 120%, is that really affordable housing in any sense of the word anymore?
It's moderate income housing.
Up to 120%?
I believe it's considered
But
moderate.
it's really not within the purview of the CPC, is it?
Well, that's a part of my point is that you're right, that CPC only allows up to 100 area median income, and to do real workforce housing to fill this gap that we're facing, you'd have to go up to about 120 area median income.
I have a question along those lines. Sorry if I'm interrupting you on this, Jenny, but if CPC, if the CPA itself, the statewide, has guidelines that CPC funds can only be used to fund up to 100%, that's it, guys. It's 100%. As much as the town would like to do up to 120, I can't see how CPC funds can be used for that without essentially breaching what the law states.
Well, and
They put laws in place for how the money is to be used. And there must be some kind of ramifications if they're not used in the way that they're appropriately supposed to be used.
well, right
So I
now,
don't know what that
yeah, so right now, the CPC has appropriately recommended the funds for affordable housing units that will have an 80% area median income, right? It's the 4 that are required by the special permit, but they also qualify as affordable housing from the CPC definition.
But they add no value because that's already required by the.
Well, the CPC doesn't care about adding value or, trying to, the law. No.
To add housing stock.
Yeah, I'm saying the CPA legally, it doesn't define 40B, it defines it by AMI.
Yep.
That's my point.
So the further regulation that you have, the biggest problem that Cohasset has is we're in Norfolk County. So all of our numbers are from Norfolk County as an average. That's the problem we have. We're not in Plymouth County like our abutting towns. So that's the big issue we have with affordable housing specific to Cohasset. So, and workforce housing the same way. So the numbers are going to come from the average of Norfolk County.
Steve Gomer, did you have a question?
I had a response to some of the comments. While CPC has restrictions with respect to percentage of income, recall that the trust has a much greater degree of flexibility with respect to how we expend funds. The second is that, again, we simply reiterate the point. The building is permitted with 4 deed restricted units and was originally permitted with 10 non-restricted units. It's quite all right to go ahead and restrict those additional units if it makes you feel better about expending the funds. But frankly, if the building is a deal and it's a bargain, then buy the building. CPC doesn't need to buy the building. Town can buy the building. And the additional funds on a tax levy are nominal on a per household basis over the course of 20 years. The third, and respectfully I say this Board of Selectmen really has no particular idea of what the trust has envisioned, what it's debated, what it's reviewed. We haven't had a member from the select board on the trust since Diane Kennedy resigned her seat. One was appointed at last week's selectmen's meeting. That's the first time we've had a member since May. So that brings me to the final point, and that is that, as you heard earlier, of course, you do need an appraisal for this, which makes sense. I just caution you to remember that deed restrictions reduce the value of any particular unit. All right, because you've reduced the cash flow that you can gain from it, and therefore it reduces its economic basis. So in all of this, I simply look at it and say, look, I get it. You want to move quickly. You want to move ahead. And by the way, to make it absolutely clear, I have no particular view one way or the other with respect to town hall. And from an economic standpoint, given that we've had 4 bites at the apple at trying to address town hall on 41 Highland Avenue, if this meets the goal, good. But wrapping it under the guise of affordable housing, I believe, is nothing more than a way of asking CPC to come in with cash at closing so the bond doesn't look that big. And we might as well call it what it is, because it's very difficult to conceive as to how this is a reasonable expense of CPC funds for affordable housing when the building doesn't get occupied without those affordable units. And if in fact we're considering now that the remainder units should go towards workforce housing, I would respectfully offer to the CPC and to the Board of Selectmen that engaging the entities that deal with this stuff day in and day out is a good way to proceed, as opposed to simply saying, yeah, we'll get to that. That's all I have to say.
Anybody else want to have comments?
Closing arguments?
Closing argument? Is that it? All right, Susan, why don't we start with Susan? And then...
I just have a question. Do you happen to know what the average mean income is for Norfolk County for 100%?
I believe it was
That dollar?
in 2022, I couldn't find the 2023 numbers. I want to say it was approximately $100,700.
Is that for an individual or a family?
For an individual.
$100,000. And do they also give like joint,
I can't recall the whole chart in my head.
just trying to get a handle of what it is and for our workforce, the starting fireman's not making $100,000, I don't think. Or do they?
Not starting, but the vast majority.
Gene, I could add something to
Paul?
that too.
So we're talking around $100,000, okay.
Paul?
So basically, our feeling is that there's a couple of opportunities here. One is 1.3 million is a lot of money dispensed out of CPC. Took a look at the last amounts of money that you dispensed, and they went to very large projects in town. This project, we already have the affordable housing, so we already get credit for the 14 units. We already have affordable housing. We're not currently preserving anything in affordable housing specific to One Pleasant Street. If the town does own the property, they have the opportunity to come back to CPC and ask for funding that's appropriate for use in moving affordable housing forward in the existing 4 units that are there, coming back to CPC and ask for additional funding appropriate to use to convert to workforce housing, or however they want to deed restrict that. That would make sense. I believe those numbers would be much lower.
I don't understand, Paul, the logic that says that if we were to tie CPC funding to additional restrictions, that we wouldn't be adding to the housing stock of affordable housing. There's a difference between getting the credit for all 14 units and actually having units that are affordable beyond the 4. Now, if we were to deed others, we would be expanding, right?
Correct. You would have to deed restrict.
So there is an avenue through which you could use this project to expand the number of units that are actually affordable.
You
It
could.
becomes smaller and affordable.
I just want
You
to
could.
Small
make
A.
that clear,
So
yeah.
you have two options, like I stated. You can lower rent.
Yep.
You take all the applicants you can handle, or you could deed restrict it, specific for your use, in which they would exactly be affordable.
Yeah.
Right. But based on what the management consultants that we had talked to on our public meetings, the management fees to run the property would be somewhere around 10 or 15% a year of the average of the rental income. So if your rental income right now is projected to be somewhere around $365,000 a year, so your fee's only gonna be $36,000 a year to run the property. I don't see where 1.3 million is appropriate to use when we know the fees are that low. We know that the town is going to have to
But
spend.
we don't know that the well, as we stand now, absolutely right. But the 1.3 has not been defined yet because we don't have a standard on which to figure the fair market value.
Correct.
That was a fairly, I assume, arbitrary number.
So worst case,
Who developed that figure?
so worst case.
That's a good
town
question, you know,
Worst case at town meeting, Article 5 passes, right? Everyone wants to do One Pleasant Street Town Hall. But Article 6 does not pass, which means the 1.3 doesn't go towards that building. Now the town has to finance 10.4 million instead of 9.1 million. To the average homeowner of a $1 million home, that increase is only $25 more per year. That's it. I would rather pay that $25 more per year right now than to give up 1.3 million of CPC money. We don't know what CPC's requirements are next year. We already know that if you own that building, you're gonna have the rental income to support it. The rest of the town doesn't have that option. They come to CPC for what they need. That's where we stand.
any questions of the board? for any
I
of
have
the
a
speakers?
question.
Yes.
I don't have a question.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
And the town doesn't own this property yet either. Like, that's what's coming up.
So we have to vote, the town's going to vote on spending 10 million for the property, correct? And then at some point, we then determine that the 1.3 million is a fair valuation for the 4 big A units.
But we're not buying those.
No, but we can contribute to our pro rata share of the capital cost. That's what I assumed all along. I'm rather new to this project. I assumed there was some handwriting here. The handwriting was, the town spends 10 million, CPC donates 1.3 million to the total capital cost, 8.7 million gets stuck on the town, and the 1.3 million becomes the assigned value for the 4 big A units. That's how I assumed, having gone through this work here. I mean, I'm a rather simple guy. I haven't been part of these complex discussions and all that. I don't know what a small A is. I just learned about small A's tonight. But I would support a project that was very simply $1.3 million for 4 units, all right? That's the town's policy, 4 big A units. Come what may with everything else. I don't understand the rest of the policy. That's not my problem on CPC. That's your problem in managing the housing stock for affordable housing. Ours is to dispense money and preserve the town. You know, and just like I'm on the Conservation Commission, we don't worry about conservation issues. We worry about things that get thrown in front of us that we have to vote on. And we have a proposal here, and that's what I think we should vote on. And leave all the other stuff to the very intelligent, qualified people to start out the housing policy of the future. I would throw all the small A's out and vote on the bare bones 1.3 million for 4 units that we're going to be voting on at the town meeting. Unless Paul were to say that's a bankrupt policy, that if that's the case, we should go to the town meeting and say, we withdraw it, we have to rethink the whole thing.
Under the vote that has been taken, CPC money would be paying for 4 units that are already stipulated by decree that they will be affordable. So if we want to do more than that, because one could make an argument that's redundant funding, you've already got that requirement. So now the question is, if we want 4 more units, or whatever we decide is the fair market value of 1.3 million, then you could specify that. Then you have increased the net number. If CPC's focus is on increasing the number of affordable units in the town, then that would be a viable option. May not be the option that some people in this room would pick, but it's a viable option. Otherwise, we're just simply paying for what's already.
I would question what we should be doing. we're funding projects that are proposed by professionally qualified people. We're not writing housing strategies here for affordable housing for Cohasset. That's not our job. That's your job, and you come to us and say you need 4 units. We think it's gonna be $1.3 million. Do you have the money or not? CPC. That's how I think.
Well,
But
Eric,
not, and not to sit here and have CPC, who are decidedly not experts on affordable housing, trying to decide these rather complicated issues. You know, we need people like yourselves to distill these complicated issues and to come to a concise proposal that works. And I'm not sure if we have that right now, Tom. Excuse me.
Okay. Well, Paul,
I'd just like to put this out there. We don't get the building. Someone's gonna buy it at some point in time. Now, they're gonna buy it to do what? Make money with it. The commercial end down below, which they have to do. Now, you can either do what the project down at the harbor did. You can technically move them off-site, apply to anyway. You could technically still payment in lieu of,
They don't have that option.
and,
It's been eliminated.
It's been.
well, that's good, thank you for
It's
telling
almost
us.
like-
But you move them off-site, and then with the rest, use market. Or you can apply for another permit to change it around, because it was started with one person, bought by another, now we're moving into a third. So who knows what's gonna happen? And I may be wrong on this, but I think, Chris, we're in safe harbor right now. But are we at our limit? I heard that we're not.
10.1918 is what we're, so just above 40B.
All right, just making it, thank you. But again, I'm gonna
So
go
no
back.
matter, no matter who buys the property, right now, it's deed restricted for 30 years. So he could sell that property 10 times
Huh?
over, but it's deed restricted for 30 years. The town will always get credit for the 14 units, and 4 will be actually affordable, the other ones will be at market rate.
They'd be at market rate.
So that's how that would be. There wouldn't be any other stipulations to
So,
that.
what would-
Specific to your comments about you're not really buying anything, right? So you're loaning money. So if you take a look at what you want to do, you want to take 1.3 and just buy the 4 units, that's fine. What you establish as a baseline of $425,000 per unit. Now, when Habitat for Humanity comes to you in a couple of months and says, hey, I've got 2 units, are you willing to give them $650,000, knowing that you've established a baseline for these units at $325,000? Is that where you want to go? You know, I mean, I just think that there's too many questions now than there were probably.
I've been on Concom for 7 years, and I've run it. And we're haunted by the decisions of the past. Some guy says, you let that lady do that, and I want to do the same thing. Why can't we do it? Well, the fact is, you have to look at every project independently. But, you know, that happens all the time in the kind of business we have. Decisions in the past come and haunt us in the future. And that's something we'd have to live with, you know, this Habitat for Humanity issue. But we're in a bind here. And to me, we're making a much more complicated role for CPC than we should have. Because the powers to be don't, I hate to say this, excuse me, don't really know what they want to do here. And we're voting on money, and we're going to the town in a few weeks. And I think if we can't decide here how much money we want to spend, what's the town going to say? Maybe that's incorrect, but kill a fish.
I don't think we could do either of those things without the appropriate appraisal. We couldn't do it for Habitat for Humanity. We can't do it for this. We have to go back to that
absolutely.
basic. And we can pay for that appraisal. We're told, you know, CPC can.
Let me refocus our situation for a second. The real operating question coming out of the box is, do we want to reconsider the vote of September 27th on going forward or not? Because then we can have a discussion about, if we decide we want to, then the question is, in what direction do we want to go forward? If the committee is happy with the vote of the 27th, then that's a decision.
Can I ask a question
Yes.
to address the comment that Eric had made? You raised a point, a valid one, that, you know, there are committees that are charged with dealing with this kind of stuff, affordable housing. Listen to them. this project, this request for CPC funding was not brought by the Affordable Housing Trust. It was not brought to you by the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. It was brought to you by the Select Board. Select Board is not charged with the review of affordable housing, so just bear that in mind.
I think we should reconsider.
Would you like to make a motion to that
I would
effect?
move that we reconsider our previous one.
If I could just make one.
Yes.
The fact is that the Affordable Housing Trust, the Affordable Housing Steering Committee report back to the select. So at the end of the day, the select board is the chief policymaking board. This is just, I'm not directing the chief policymaking board for the town of Cohasset. So the Affordable Housing Steering Committee is appointed by the select board. The Affordable Housing Trust is appointed by the select board. And so the select board actually does set policy on affordable housing. How they do it, and who talks to who, that's a whole other question about how that all disturbed, it gets distilled. That said, I just want to be clear about that. So the select board really is the center of the policy making in this form of government.
So is it the select board that's requesting the 1.3?
Yes, that application was made by the select.
Should the
Sorry?
member of this voting board
CPA has-
recuse himself? if
Well,
he's a
but
select board?
then the member of the affordable housing, somebody from the housing authority shouldn't be voting on that, and somebody from conservation should be voting.
I
It doesn't
just-
work
I
like
just-
this. Now, the point of, the reason there's such a diversity of members of this board, because they all bring a different set of expertise.
Okay.
But no one's being personally, and no one has any personal investments in this, right? No one's benefited personally from any of the acts. They're here to represent interests more than, so. Again, by the way, I'm not taking a position here. I want to be clear about that, other than the fact the select board made its decision. This time. Well, if you do vote to reconsider, there'll have to be some kind of motion on the floor, because the warrant's set, right? And the recommendations are already in there. So there has to be something drafted on for the floor of town meeting.
Yep.
If you choose to go, I mean,
Okay.
it's been done before, it's just.
Yep.
It's gonna require work in advance.
Okay,
What
So-
frustrates me about this, if you mind.
no,
if I
please.
can speak. What frustrates me about this whole application is its sloppiness, fast-pacedness, and just irresponsibility by, it seems like a couple organizations or boards just not communicating. And we have not been presented all the facts. So to have us make these large decisions that now we have to present to the town, if we recommend this, is I feel like we've been taken advantage of, and I just like how the CPC has been treated and disrespected. I think first thing is, we don't have the facts about the evaluation of the property, and that seems to be the stickler here too. And if we can decide on the value of the income level, that would be in these units as well. So I think we do need to reevaluate our decision. But I advise the town to communicate better within their organizations, and their applications should be further detailed. Having been on other organizations such as conservation, we would have tossed this out immediately. It's embarrassing for the town. So I think the CPC should look, or yes, the CPC should look at our, reevaluate this decision. Because we were not presented the facts. And I disagree with how this has been handled.
All right, we have a motion before us. Jennifer,
I did have one other question before the motion comes.
can I just see if we have a second for that motion?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I'll second it.
Okay, all right, motion seconded. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So my question about the motion in doing it and making that decision, we were told in between the two decisions that under section 5F of the CPA legislation, that we need an appraisal. And so I guess I want to make sure in deciding whether we reconsider or don't, or where we go forward, the 1.3 million, where that number and I guess I want to make sure that we're following the rules and having an appraisal. And so I didn't know exactly where that number came from. And then making sure that in using a number, we have to make sure that we're using a number that abides by the law.
Chris?
So first, an appraisal is in practice. So no, because we did that. Second, the numbers that were generated were produced through my office, to Michelle Leary, who's a professional real estate agent, who's been doing this for many years. She used math using, it was common in the real estate industry to come up with the numbers. So it wasn't just a number pulled out of thin air. And I don't remember the numbers, but I think they were shared with all of you at the time. In fact, all of you voted for it at the time. And she made a presentation. So again, so we didn't have the appraisal at that point, but Michelle's years of experience and again, the information she gleaned from industry practices got to that. At the same time, we are getting an actual firm appraisal because we need that. So that's in practice.
It's quite clear, though, the CPC has to get an independent appraisal. So,
You're more than welcome to do that as well. If you,
yeah, well, I think it's required. It's not a question of discretion. The law is quite explicit. So that,
And we have to
and-
pay for it.
well, we have the option there, but we'd be happy to have the town pay for it. But
It's gotta be, it's hard, the market is kind of strong right now in Cohasset. So we've retained some of it, we've been waiting for the next appraisal for weeks. I'm just saying, it's probably likely to push back. You trade something now, likely to push past that meeting.
I suspect that's right, but we could also have a conditional resolution that says not to exceed, dependent on if that's the judgment of the group. Okay.
I think hopefully ours will.
Just to remind people what that resolution was that we approved, was to approve $1.3 million for funding for affordable units at 1 Pleasant Street. So fairly simple, straightforward. So, and Ginny has raised the motion of whether we should reconsider. So we will, any further comment on the motion?
I have a question.
Yes.
If we take back what we voted on,
Yep,
could then we make a new vote on the additional 9 units that exist?
absolutely. Once we clear the deck, we can entertain any new resolution that people want to put forward.
Okay,
But the first thing is we have to dispose, do we want to stick with what we got or do we want to move to something else?
I think the current 4 have been already paid for and were already noted in the planning board
Right.
documents that, so I would suggest we take that back. And then
I don't know whether they've been paid for, but they've certainly been
Right, they
designated.
have, right, they've been
So,
designated. Plus, the building has not been acquired, and
Yep.
we're focusing only on housing, affordable housing, and not on the town hall. We should remember where our focus is.
right. All right, all in favor of Ginny's motion, say aye. Oh, well, do we have to go round? All right, Ginny,
Jenny, I.
Jennifer, aye.
Paul,
No.
Mark,
Mark, aye.
Tom, aye.
Eric, aye.
Mary Ann, aye.
Okay,
Darren, no.
Darren?
Darren Susan, no.
oh, Derek, I'm sorry. No? Okay, 6-2. Is that? All right, so the motion carries to reconsider. Now, we have a clean slate. Does anybody want to make a motion or raise an issue about how we might proceed from here?
We have 2 things. One
Guess
is
you better
the,
get your appraisal.
one is the appraisal,
Yep.
and the other would be some form of deeding or additional units or something. We would suggest.
Do the.
Those would be the 2 conditions.
Let me put forward a hypothetical, maybe we put into a motion or not, but that we agree that we will approve expanding the amount of affordable units in town through a grant to the 1 Pleasant Street for additional designated units not to exceed $1.3 million as determined by an independent audit.
So.
So we
however
buy
much
as
that
many,
would buy.
as many square feet as we can for that amount of money.
Could we also add to that, like a contingency that because the CPA guidelines recommend up to 100 I guess it's called 100 area medium,
100% of the area average median income.
that we do that.
This would be
For what
Paul's
we
big
can
A.
afford. How is that said?
That's small A.
Well, it's-
Oh,
Big A is 80%.
and any income restriction is affordable housing. So whether it's called workforce housing or if it's called 40B affordable housing,
mhm.
either one of them, they're restricted by income. So there's a
So
formula
it's-
that the state has based on Norfolk County's average income, where they would get the workforce number from and where they would get the regular family number from for the big A. Those deed restrictions would come from the
The units at the housing authority are limited to what percentage of income? 80%.
That's big A.
That's big A, that's what I was
Workforce
saying.
housing.
But,
That's what I was
workforce
saying.
housing has
Bring it up to
deed
100.
restrictions as well.
because I think CPA guidelines says we can do up to 100. Is that right, Dina?
So that gives us.
For workforce,
Between
part
80
of
and
affordable housing is
100%.
workforce housing. They'll have the percentage of deed restriction you're looking for.
Okay, so I don't think we can write that in without knowing that knowledge.
And once you deed those, then there's a process where you could have local preference or preferences applied to those restrictions to where, I believe on Elm Street, veterans get first preference now because that's a Massachusetts state
Local
law.
veterans.
Local veterans, it's a Massachusetts state law.
Me,
So
then
so
move
there
on
are
the street.
preferences that could apply to the deed restrictions. So if you wanted, veterans, or if you wanted seniors, those, or residents from the town, those are what they call preferences that could be in place with the deed restriction. So the deed restriction is restricted by income level, whether it's workforce housing or big A, affordable housing. And then within those deeds restrictions, you can apply these preferences. And the state has preferences of which ones come first.
But if we did that additional restriction, I guess that would affect our workforce housing that they've been trying to attack, or trying to fulfill. But that's up to 120, but the
We
CPA
can't do
guidelines.
that, 120. So
Right,
we'd
120
have to limit our contribution to whatever
to 100.
is 100% or 80%. Yeah.
Yes, Paul.
Question for Chris. So who tells the town that CPC is just backing off on something they put and that's on the warrant right now? How does that work?
CPC would do it.
We'll just tell them right at town meeting?
Sure.
Maybe the selectmen on the board of the CPC.
I'm sorry?
The selectmen on the board?
Yeah, you're on the-
Why? I
Yeah.
voted no.
I just,
So that's what
There are plenty of people who have to represent,
Yeah.
as chair of a committee, something that they did not vote for.
I don't think this is an issue. I mean, I think we can explain at the time what took place, the reconsideration process, and the substitution resolution, and putting it before the town as our recommendation. It changed. Information changed. So
And also the conditions.
I don't think that's either unprecedented or all that difficult.
good point.
I think a good portion of the audience would applaud you for doing that, right? Be very happy that we could be as honest.
It's
as
not
Yeah,
with
right
rules,
as that.
it's conditions. And we can put conditions on any grant application, and we do.
But I think the failure to change your mind in the face of changing information would be a mistake.
May I raise a point here? I ideally would like to have someone in the audience, I'm looking at two people, forward a proposal that we could vote on. But having us write the proposal seems to be getting the whole thing wrong. Someone, whether it be on the select board or the affordable housing committees, really should come to CPC and say, you guys, this is what we want you to do. And give us the numbers and the facts with a policy that you all support, and we can say yes or no, it's worth our funding. We're in the unfortunate position of having to sort of write the policy ourselves. And on conservation, we always tell people, we're not here to do your engineering. You're supposed to do your job and, get your drainage right and your wetlands right, and then we'll vote on it. But you're asking us to redo the project for you, and that's not our role. And that's not our role here, to define what the big A and small a policy should be. And I suppose that the wording could be vague enough to give them the opportunity to do that, all right? And, you know,
I think that's
this
an
vagueness that you
interesting-
talked about.
I think that's an interesting perspective. I mean, it could be that we would ask, we've made it clear what our concerns are, trying to expand the pool while at the same time trying to participate in a way that's constructive, to ask the town administration to come back with a proposal that you think would meet
Meets the
those
needs.
requirements. Jean, you want to say something?
The select board has a meeting on Thursday. We could probably modify the agenda to open this up more generally on this point. But we have to do it in a public meeting and we
Sure.
need a full select board. So Paul and I can't, you know, sit right here and riff on a select board position. We have to do that in an open meeting. And then November 7th is our last select board meeting. That's next Tuesday before town meeting. I mean, we'll have one right before town meeting. But the select board's, I think, position is clear on the warrant, right? And so if you want us to come up with something that's different than what's the warrant article, we'll need the full board to, you know, do that, pursuant to open meeting. In our, you know.
Yeah. I guess I'm not sure I'm getting the language kind of aligned, but what would be helpful to us is a resubmission of a proposal for CPC for support that kind of corresponds to the concerns we've expressed with the existing project. And it seems to me that that's something that the town administration can do. I mean, they put in the original proposal. We're now saying the board has expressed these concerns, or at least a number of people, so you've heard that. Can you distill that? And I'd be happy to work with you in any way that's constructive, but so that we achieve what you're trying to do while at the same time achieving what we're trying to do.
So again, I think Mr. Senior and we can talk, but I do think if you want the select boards.
Sure, that's
We're just gonna have to do it at a publicly noticed select.
that's fine. I'm not suggesting for a second that we
And
do.
you'll have another CPC meeting at which
Yeah,
point they
yeah.
present that new
Yes.
request.
Exactly.
And if the select board maintains its position, Tom, I can convey that to you and then you can decide from there.
Sure. Yep.
I can't speak for the select boards in terms of what they want to do now.
Nor do I speak for this board, but I.
Do a pretty good job of it.
But you will be.
Yeah.
So you have a board meeting already scheduled for November 13th, the night of the town meeting.
Yes, we do, but I would like to deal with this before that. You know, that's a fast meeting before we're going in, and we need to figure out how, you know, to Paul's point, who's going to explain this? I think we need to figure out what we're saying and why. So I don't think that's a good idea. You said that you're meeting on Thursday,
Meeting on Thursday and then we have another meeting on Tuesday.
so is there some chance this could come up on Thursday, that Steve,
Yeah,
Chris?
we've already noticed the One Pleasant Street Affordable Housing Grant Agreement, so we were trying to address what we thought.
Okay.
were concerns already.
So a new application could be written with kind of our concerns in it,
Can't they just
During
submit
that
an
meeting.
amended application?
Sure,
That's
that's,
full information in
that's
it
what I'm sort of.
that we've been requiring.
I think it has to be more than concerns. I think it has to be, these are the conditions under which we will grant that have to be met. An appraisal, an expansion of the number of units.
Yep.
And how they will be.
To say that, then we have to vote on that, right? To say our conditions, and then they have to make.
So maybe we should try to shoot for a meeting next Wednesday? So you have a meeting on Thursday and Tuesday?
I'm just trying to figure out if and when we'll have an appraisal by, from a timing perspective, because maybe we can look at that and take that into consideration. Just not sure we'll have it quickly. Well, we'll start and see how far we get.
All
And I
right,
can update you, Tom.
so
We'll
we'll,
start on Thursday.
Okay.
Including their request and what the select board is willing or not willing to do.
so do people, can next Wednesday work for people?
Yeah, I'm home, I'm here.
All right.
Can't something be voted on at town meeting?
Before we do adjourn,
Say,
I've noticed
you know,
Chris
somebody
Plex
got
is
up
on
and
the,
said,
been on the screen. He has a
we are
question.
Oh, I'm
revising
sorry.
This.
He just keeps
So that it
disappearing.
meets the following conditions. If the town agrees to meet these following conditions. support. Can't that be the basis of the
Just from a
vote?
technical point of view, it's so much easier to go to town meeting with clean motions.
Yeah.
That's the 8th.
Otherwise the whole
You
thing.
mean
is-
just we're gonna make a new motion
Yeah,
here?
yeah. So-
Okay.
If things, if consensus is reached before, it's so much easier to go.
All right.
I'll leave the motion there.
Any other comments?
7 o'clock next Wednesday.
Pardon me? Next Wednesday at 7 o'clock?
It's the 8th.
Oh, I can't.
Can others?
I think I can.
Can't be there.
Marion, Mark,
I'm available.
Paul?
I have my Boston speaker series.
The 8th, yep.
Do we have a quorum?
No, the 8th. I don't know. Jennifer, can you?
Yes, I can.
I can make it.
I'm going to the Boston Speaker Series and I don't want to miss that.
Oh, Paul, can you
Who's
make it?
speaking?
Wednesday, I should be okay.
Dan Johnson.
It looks like we have a quorum.
Yeah.
So,
Darren can make it.
Darren, oh, great. Thank you, Darren. So 7 o'clock, will you see if we can get this building? And we'll do
May I ask the
Zoom.
question?
Pardon me?
I'm just hoping to, maybe this is recap. Arriving at the conditions for a proposal, so what is the sequence of events to, and who owns that? Is there a feedback loop or, with CPC and the select board, or we've touched on some of those conditions tonight, but how do we envision getting there to what those are going to need to be?
My understanding is that the select board, in combination with the town administration and the town manager, will confer and resubmit a proposal
Okay,
for CPC support that reflects the conversations we've had over the past week or more, but certainly this
Yeah.
evening. So,
okay,
so that we'll try to, the skill and balance would be to try to achieve the objectives of the select board and the CPC in ways that advance
right.
both interests.
Has to be an independent.
And Eric made a good point about being on Concom and not feeling like he has to do the engineering work of an applicant at the same time. I'm just wondering if we can eliminate risk of guesswork and sort of, having a good sense as to what those required conditions might be on, from our standpoint. So, thank you.
Well, I am happy to work with the select board and Paul is a member of the select board, so, and I think Chris has been listening today,
Yep.
so, yes, Jean.
I know it's late, but it might be helpful if you all could summarize your perspective, including the conditions, so to speak, just so we can have.
Sure.
Just to make sure everyone's on the same page, so this time is tight.
Okay, why don't we give everybody a shot at it?
Well, I like the idea of expanding, if we're running back for an expanded number or of deeded units. To me, I don't think we can support anything that goes up to 120%. That's up for the CPC. But if you could expand another 4 units at least, or
Paul was talking about Paul had mentioned all 9 of them originally. That was the idea, was that all 9 additional units in addition to the 4 that are designated capital A, 80% income housing could be some kind of workforce housing or something like that. This would be not 120% though, because if
Right.
are only allowed to go to 100%, that's what you got to work with.
So let me ask, just for clarity, including preserving our legal bills on this issue.
Yeah.
What about some sort of hybrid? And again, the select board has to agree, but what if there was some sort of hybrid where we said, okay, let's set the 4 permitted units aside, that's at 80%. and we do 4 at 100% AMI, which is your limit. And then the rest, we're looking at doing workforce at 120. So we already know we have the 4 at 80. We've got another 4 going up to 100. And then the remainder will come from workforce housing, because you can only do local preference for 70%.
But the dollar amount would have to be determined by the appraisal. So that might not get you $1.3 million. That might get you 750,000.
That's why we need the
I
evaluation.
mean, I don't have a
too.
clue what it would get you, but the principle is right. That what we're looking for is more low-income housing for the money we pay. Okay, Jennifer, do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think what you said is exactly what I was thinking. Like if we could add a few more to, and like you said, maybe the hybrid, somewhere, and then knowing that the remainder of the units will be that workforce housing, and obviously that doesn't come under us, unfortunately. But, yeah.
Paul?
No, my goal hasn't changed. It's to have genuine, affordable housing. And again, I'll go back to my earlier statement, community preservation.
Okay. Mark?
I mean, if we can I'd like to build on what Paul said and build on what you said, and if we can expand more affordable housing in town, like that's should be our goal. This is a great opportunity to do it, sorry.
Okay. Eric?
Certainly I support the program, all right? And I would support going above 4 big A units. If you want to go to 5 or 6, if we have the money, and I have no problem with that. At the meeting, I would stay away from big A, small a. I would stay away from workforce housing. I think those are side issues and just gonna cause a lot of chaff and smoke in the air, and you're gonna confuse people. But talk about the big thrust forward, which is 4 or 5 or 6 big A units, leave big A out, all right? And say it's a solid step forward into the future of affordable housing in Cohasset, and focus on that and leave the other stuff, by the wayside. The kind of stuff we got involved in here will not go over at the town meeting, I don't think. It's just
I
too
agree.
much, too granular, all right, so.
Mary Ann?
CPA guidelines are to acquire and create a housing, so I'm for affordable housing. If we can look between acquire the additional 4 or 9 units and cap it with some income levels. I don't know how to do it, if it's A or B. I'm okay with that. And in perpetuity, the fancy word to put on top of that.
Darren?
Wink, I would.
And also to evaluate the property.
Yes.
So is
Aaron?
the concept we're discussing now to go to this baseline of 80% of the AMI, area median income, and to actually net increase the capital A affordable housing? But then to Eric's point, beyond those maybe incremental 2 units or so, not get caught up in the 100% to 120, the other small A's. Is that the discussion right now?
Yeah.
Yes.
We're going from 4 to 8 with a valid appraisal.
8.
Or
Could be.
From 4 to whatever.
whatever we
yeah.
can get.
Is that helpful?
But let me push CPC one more time, given the concerns about signaling to the affordable housing community. Do you want the existing 4 units that are required by the special permit
Mhm.
to be included in the overall CPC number?
No.
No.
Okay,
But
but that could lower the price per unit as to affordable housing. You know what I mean? That was one of the concerns I think Mr. Pierce had of pricing in the future at your comps. That could be something we could consider.
Well, first of all, I don't speak for the committee, obviously, but personally, I would exempt those 4. They're already required. So now the question is, how do we add value
Yeah.
to the housing stock? And
that's good. Yeah, are they required, do these require to have 1 accessible unit?
The standard they are.
They are required.
There's an elevator.
Yeah, but the unit has to be physically accessible.
Within the units.
How do you mean?
Wider doorways, just.
Doorways, walk-in tub, that kind of thing?
With the doorways.
Yeah.
I think that's what we said before. You guys do the engineering of this and figure it out and present it to us, just with all the details.
All right. Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll
So
make that
moved.
motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Meeting adjourned.
Well done, Mike.